For the longest time, EA has continued to declare time and again that single-player games are no longer as relevant as they once used to be, that live services are the way of the future, that single-player games with a simple, transparent transaction that has a beginning, middle, and end isn't the way to go anymore, that games have to continue and continue ad infinitum and keep players engaged forever. In fact, here we have an article from news outlet Destructoid from none other than James Stephanie Sterling, whose headline reads, EA, single-player games are finished. That is exactly what was stated by an EA executive, EA Games president Frank Gibeau, who said, quote, I volunteer you to speak to EA studio heads. They'll tell you the same thing. They're very comfortable moving the discussion towards how we make connected gameplay, be it cooperative or multiplayer or online services, as opposed to fire and forget, package goods only, single player, 25 hours and you're out. I think that model is finished. Online is where the innovation and the action is at, were his exact words 12 years ago, and that's a philosophy that really hasn't fully gone away. While EA has been more open to releasing single-player games, seeing the successes of plenty of other single-player titles, EA's ideal future is still one where they can continue to keep players engaged in one product and infinitely monetize that one product, instead of outputting a selection of compelling titles that just come to an end. And that's not to say that multiplayer, long-term, live service style games don't have a place in the games industry, but this declaration that single-player games are no longer relevant is utterly ridiculous. Then here we have an article from also James Stephanie Sterling from news outlet Destructoid from 10 years ago, whose headline reads, EA boss proudly refuses to publish single-player games, stating that when he said back then that single-player games are finished, what he was trying to say was that you can have a very deep single-player game, but it has to have an ongoing content plan for keeping customers engaged beyond what's on the initial disc, a roadmap, if you will. I'm not saying deathmatch must come to Mirror's Edge. He added that games are to be thought of as services. Now, we are very proud of the way EA evolved with consumers. I have not greenlit one game to be developed as a single-player experience. Today, all of our games include online applications and digital services that make them live 24/7, 365. One of our biggest growth opportunities is play for free titles that allow customers to play at no cost and make purchases via microtransactions. This is the origin of the awful trends we're seeing today when it comes to video game monetization and long-term live services. And then there was that infamous statement from Blake Jorgensen when he declared that as we kept reviewing the game, referring to the Visceral Star Wars game that got canned, and Visceral also got shut down along with the project, it continued to look like a much more linear game, which people don't like as much today as they did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Now, I've heard some people defend this by saying, well, they didn't exactly say single-player games are dead, just linear games. But we know exactly what they're implying here, especially when you consider this quote, you gotta cut the bridge when you realize you can't make a lot of money on something. Of course, he wasn't directly going to say single-player games are dead, given how well that went for EA last time they did that, but what they're implying here is very clear. Linear games, those games that have a beginning, middle, and end and only last a certain number of hours and then you move on, that's no longer a relevant model. And not to mention EA executives such as Andrew Wilson and Blake Jorgensen have repeated time and again that they believe live services are the way of the future and that they are the direction that the games industry as a whole should be headed in. And that is a notion that the majority of gamers are utterly disgusted by, especially given the large success of plenty of amazing, incredible single-player titles that don't at every turn try to gouge you out of your money and consistently try to nickel and dime you. So why do I bring all of this up? Well, EA made a grave mistake by tweeting what they assume would be a fun little joke that ended up with them being utterly destroyed by the internet. This is the tweet in question. They're a 10, but they only like playing single-player games. There's this meme that's been going around on Twitter where people say they're a 10, but, and then a caveat, something negative that kind of diminishes that 10, and EA is cheekily trying to participate in that, but in their attempt to be cheeky and funny, but along the way, they decided to take a jab at single-player games, or folks who just like to play single-player games. An asinine thing to say on its own, given that single-player games are some of the most amazing experiences in gaming. In fact, you look at Game of the Year awards and look at how many of those are those single-player focused, concentrated, artistically driven experiences. But this coming from a company like EA that has consistently put down single-player games, that has consistently insisted that single-player games are no longer relevant, makes this an especially sore topic for the gaming industry and for gaming enthusiasts, which is why you're seeing roasts across the board, and not just from outsiders, but from EA developers themselves. Vince Zampella, head of Respawn, the man responsible for one of EA's recent successful single-player releases, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, just tweeted a facepalm. And he is a high-ranking member within EA. Even he was like, come on, EA, what the hell are you doing? And also relevant is that Respawn is spearheading yet another single-player title, the sequel to that successful single-player game in the form of Star Wars Jedi Survivor, as pointed out here by Actman with a tweet, "This you," which has garnered almost 10,000 upvotes already. And then up here, we got Paul Tassi, who tweeted this zinger. Understandable you are unfamiliar with the concept of tens. It is especially baffling that EA's Twitter account would publish this, even if it's as a joke, when their multiplayer experiences have been this, or this, or this, or for that matter, this. They take a jab at the idea of people who lean towards single-player games, and yet their multiplayer releases are utter monetization-driven garbage. They give us crap like this, and this, and this, and this, and expect us to not begin to just want to play single-player games, since multiplayer games have become so untrustworthy, so reliant on monetization at the expense of gameplay loops, at the expense of artistic integrity, at the expense of the full potential that could have been realized had it not been ruined by monetization. One of the biggest YouTubers, Jacksepticeye, chimed in. They're a 10, but thought this tweet was a good idea. Indeed, given EA's history of downplaying single-player games and putting on a pedestal microtransactions-infested live services as the future of gaming, a future that gamers as a whole dread, them even remotely thinking about putting out a tweet like this that insults single-player games, given what a sore spot this has been for EA's past statements and their recent history, it's just baffling that anyone at EA thought putting this tweet out there would be well received, that this would in any way, shape, or form be received as endearing and as a cheeky thing to laugh at, when, especially when it comes to EA, this is no laughing matter. We got Liana Rupert from Bungie chiming in, Dragon Age enters the fight, Annapurna Interactive, the publisher behind some of the most incredible indie games and single-player games at that, linear, more open world, whatever it is, but purely artistic-driven single-player experiences. They tweeted, should have kept this in the drafts, and then they have the emoji of like trying to look away from the train wreck, but still not being able to, still trying to take a peek. Andy Cortez from Kinda Funny, delete this and then reboot Anthem into a single-player RPG. There is one game that could have been incredible had it been more focused, had there been better leadership, and yes, had it been a single-player title, which is what BioWare specializes in, but decided to go for a live service, a genre that BioWare just wasn't experienced in, and yeah, that definitely clearly showed in the final results. In the same way that YouTube doesn't get to joke about copyright abuse, given that they have enabled that and it's caused a lot of pain and misery to a lot of people and it's a sore topic, EA doesn't get to poke at people who like to play single-player games, when the reason so many folks have gravitated towards single-player games is because EA has standardized multiplayer games being made in a cynical, greedy, and just, utterly predatory way. God of War director Cory Barlog also chimed in, tweeting a simple single-player games forever. And Cory Barlog has always been a huge proponent for calling out EA anytime they try to downplay single-player games or try to declare them as irrelevant. In fact, back in November of 2017, around the same time that GameSpot released this article reporting on how Blake Jorgensen declared that people don't enjoy linear games as much as they used to, he, in response, tweeted, without reservation, from article about EA exec commenting on Visceral Game, and then he highlights the quote where Blake Jorgensen says that linear games just aren't as relevant as they used to be. People don't enjoy them as much as they did 5 or 10 years ago. Oh dear God, EA, just utter nonsense with a facepalm. This is something he's spoken out about before, and he's doing it once again, but, approaching it from a place of love. Single-player games forever, hell frickin' yes. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the amount of roasting that EA has been receiving as a result of this tweet. That is an extremely poor taste given what EA represents in the gaming industry, what they've said in the past, and the kind of trends that they've set, the awful multiplayer games trend that they have helped normalize and made the games industry a worse place. Now, EA's official Twitter page attempts to salvage this by retweeting their awful tweet here and posting the following: roast well deserved. We'll take this L because playing single-player games actually makes them an 11. Which is extremely dishonest coming from the company that has time and again insisted that single-player games are dying, that people don't enjoy them as much, and that that's no longer a model that should be pursued when single-player games have paved the road to some of the most incredible interactive experiences in our lifetimes. This would be like if YouTube came out and said, we'll take the L on this because those who fight against copyright abuse, they are an 11 in my book. It's that level of, bruh, how much self-awareness can you lack? How can you not see what you're doing here and how utterly ridiculous and stupid and insulting you'll end up looking? Now look, do I see what EA posted here as an official statement from the executives or anything of the sort? No. I think this was the social media manager, the guy running the EA Twitter page, trying to get cheeky, trying to poke a little fun. I don't know. But they're out there thinking that people have forgotten about EA's past history, thinking that they are buddy-buddy with the gaming community when EA continues to be among the most despised and infamous gaming publishers, and for good reason. And look, I'd love to give them the opportunity to, eventually make amends, first of all, by apologizing for declaring that single-player games are no longer relevant or that linear games are no longer relevant, and admitting that they were wrong about that. That'd be a start. But second, it'd be great if their multiplayer games could ship in a polished state, in a state that isn't so heavily monetized that it ruins the potential of what could have been an amazing game. And when it comes to their single-player games, the only saving grace they have right now is basically Respawn and titles like Jedi Fallen Order, of which from EA unfortunately are too few and far between. The only compliment I can give EA is that they do have that Indies program where they do fund these really great games like It Takes Two, so I'll give them credit there, but it's nowhere near enough to make up for all of the other wrongs that they have partaken in and continue to partake in. So it's honestly uplifting to see the games industry as a whole coming together to roast this tweet, including folks within EA's ranks, including Vince Zampella himself, who, as someone who has created great single-player titles like Jedi Fallen Order, is rightfully upset that EA would put out a tweet like this, implying that folks who only focus on single-player games, somehow that's something that shouldn't be normalized. The fact of the matter is that anyone can play whatever games they want to play. If you just want to play multiplayer games or just want to play single-player games or a mix of both, you shouldn't be shamed for whichever direction you lean towards. Just play the games you want to play, enjoy the games you want to play, and they can all coexist at once. That's the point to drive forward here. The idea is not multiplayer games shouldn't be allowed to exist, only single-player games should exist. Or the other way around, it's not only live services and multiplayer games should exist, single-player games are an antiquated thing. It's make every kind of game, any kind of game should be able to coexist, and the more variety we have, the better. And when it comes to multiplayer games, the more we can course correct that, the more maybe we'll be less cynical about announcements of multiplayer games, of live services, and all of these things that are very much a minefield. We all have to be very careful about navigating that, something that you wouldn't have said, 20 years ago when the most we had to worry about was whether a game, was shipped in good quality or not, and whether it's to our tastes or not. But we never had to worry about, is this a game that's trying to psychologically manipulate me into spending all my savings on basically nothing, on worthless, fictional zeros and ones. That, ladies and gentlemen, is one man's take on a really idiotic tweet on the part of EA that rallied basically the entire games industry against them. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on this tweet and people's reactions to this tweet and what your reaction might have been. Is it a big deal to react to this, or do you think it's an overreaction? I personally think it is just it does make the blood boil a little bit, especially coming from EA. But one man's take. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.